You're listening to the Dead Padawan Society, a science fiction and fantasy podcast celebrating the ideas, mythologies, and truths in iconic works of sci-fi. I'm your host, Nick Dennis, joined by my friend,
Brett Inman.
Hey, Brett. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing well. How has your week been?
It's been a good week. I actually got to visit my family this past week, so that was super, super nice. I very seldom, they live 8 hours away. I wish I could jump in a spaceship or on a transporter. Anytime I go home, my mom always says, you should have invented a transporter. You were watching Star Trek as a child. You should have invented a transporter by now.
That should have been a thing by now, to where you could just jump. That is my... You know when anyone asks you what superpower you could have? Yeah. And so many people say, like, flying.
Flying is worthless.
Flying or I mean, it'd be super
fun.
Strong or something like that. I've always wanted to be able to teleport. To be like Nightcrawler without the blue skin. But
you have to take the
if
two.
you could
It's
teleport,
a package deal.
If you could teleport anywhere, or like Jumper, that movie, then that's super convenient and helpful. I would never have to worry about a dumb car again, like it breaking down.
Especially if you could teleport with people and objects.
Absolutely. If you can grab something and take it with you, you could be. I was thinking you could monetize that really easy. You could be a crazy fast courier. Like I'm a courier. I'll get it there within a matter of minutes, and you don't tell them how you do it. You do it.
Dude, it's amazing.
You can make a ton of money.
You came up with an honest way to use a superpower. Anytime I think about having superpowers, I become a supervillain. It's inevitable.
Well, of course, I've also thought about, I could teleport into a vault and take a ton of money.
Yeah, see, because I would love, if I had a superpower, I would want to be able to do something with mind control or reading minds. And the only reason I want that is just so I can be manipulative and horrible. Like, I would be a supervillain.
See, I've also thought it would be a great power would be if you could turn yourself not just invisible, but undetectable to anything.
Yeah.
Like if I could ask for one, it'd be like, I am undetectable by any means. And so like heat or sound or anything. You could go to Roswell, New Mexico and see what's there and just stroll in.
Hey guys.
It's like no one can know I'm here and I'm gonna go see the aliens.
Yeah, or the hangar where they have like an experimental jet that they're working on. It's just a bunch of engineers and technicians.
It's saucers, it's flying saucers. That's where the government developed
they're
them.
building them,
Yeah.
They're terrestrial though.
They've been able to move any way in air for like 50 years. Yeah. It's all government.
It would blow our minds, though, if we saw it. So they've had to keep it secret.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so what about your week?
My family has actually been gone this week. I've been alone here at home because my wife and daughter are up visiting family. This week I've been watching a ton of stuff and catching up on some things that I haven't had a chance to.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I've also been watching a lot of movies that I can't watch with my wife, or she just would refuse to.
Yeah.
They're not her cup of tea, and I'll get into those in a minute because
Eraserhead and
I watched Eraserhead from David Lynch.
You actually did. That's funny because I was just saying that as something that I didn't think your wife would ever watch with you.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, because I mentioned that on our last podcast, I believe, and I watched it this week. So as David Lynch is messed up.
At his lynchiest.
Really, yeah. And it's interesting because I had watched Twin Peaks, the whole Twin Peaks before seeing this, and there's so many connections. And I totally get the people who are like, there's one Lynch-verse, like everything's in the same universe, because there were things in there that show up in Twin Peaks, and they're straight up the same things. And I was like, oh, this could easily be in the same universe. So very, very weird out there stuff. That's a whole other discussion.
It really is.
Yeah. So what you been obsessed with this week?
My latest obsession, and this is probably going to lose, like I'm going to have to check my man card right now. My wife and I have been watching the series New Girl, and I love it. Like, absolutely love that show. The writing
a funny show.
Is great. Okay, so good. I get to keep my man card?
I haven't seen all of the seasons. I think I've seen 1 through 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And I thought, it's a hilarious show.
See, my wife and I have a rule about shows where we basically have to wait for them to die to start watching them, because inevitably, like, we started The Walking Dead and we got to where there's no more Walking Dead on Netflix and the show's still going on, and so it's super, super disappointing whenever you hit that wall.
Missing anything there.
That's what I've heard.
It's just gone to the dumpster.
So we have tried to watch shows that have already ended so that we can watch them in their entirety, or if we want to drop out at some point we can. We started watching Cheers for that reason, and we got to a certain point, probably 2/3 of the way through, where we were kind of done with it and wanted to do something else. And she had watched New Girl before. That's the thing. A lot of times she will watch a show and then recommend it, and so then we'll end up going back and she can rewatch stuff. And so we've been doing that with New Girl, but it's hilarious. I especially the housemates absolutely love those characters. So,
my favorite character, not because he has my same name, but is Nick. I love that guy.
Yeah,
like his just lax view of all of life, and he's just a curmudgeon, and I feel like I am a very young curmudgeon as well. Funny. And so I relate to him.
See, I love, and I'm nothing like this character, but I love Schmidt.
Oh, Schmidt. Yeah,
and part of it is just there. We've seen the episode where they end up defining him as the mom of the family, and it's like, it's so true. So it's so funny that, initially he's presented as this really just jerk that you wouldn't want to be around, but he ends up being so endearing in the ways that he is helpful to the group and like serves his function.
Right.
So it's such
he's kind of like a frat boy who hasn't grown up at first, and it's just like, you're still this old.
Yeah.
But
then you realize he's actually probably the most responsible of the group. Like, it's so interesting to juxtapose the different kind of parts of his life, and then I'm even interested in learning more about him to kind of see, because they do the flashbacks where he's super overweight and just like, and so I'm really interested to see that character seems to have the most possibilities in some ways.
Yeah.
So, and then I love like Winston, which is ironic that he's named Winston, because he reminds me a lot of Winston from Ghostbusters. It's like this random perspective that is so different than everybody else's.
I had never thought about that before.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of like the wild card in the group of, you never know what he's going to be doing.
Yeah. So I've really been enjoying watching that with Mary Catherine. What about you? What's your latest obsession?
Well, since I've been watching weird out there things this week that I can't on a normal week, I've also watched Eraserhead. Also, I really like, we're in the Halloween and fall season now, and so I really like watching horror movies, but bad ones. I really like Troll 2. Have you seen Troll 2?
I have seen Troll 2. Finally, I only just saw it like last year.
Oh, it's that movie I love. That's probably my favorite bad horror movie. But I got together with Daniel Spear this weekend. We watched The Gate. It's a
we can check off referencing Daniel Spear in this episode. So we've done that.
Every week we have to get him in there. But he came over and we watched this movie called The Gate, which is this terrible, hilarious horror movie from the 80s where these kids, a tree in their backyard, in this kid's backyard, falls down and it makes a gaping hole in their yard, which just happens to be a portal to hell. And all these little claymation demons come out of it.
I have heard of this.
Have you seen?
I've seen clips of the little tiny demons.
Because they can like morph into things, and then they split and they run around and they're crazy. And if you get a chance, go on YouTube and watch the trailer. The trailer alone is hilarious. But yeah, it's called The Gate, and it's all these horrible 80s cliches. There's the teenagers who come in and they're all in ridiculous outfits, and there's all the references are so dated and things that they say are so cringeworthy because they're from the 80s. But altogether it's hilarious. So we watched that, and then we watched a movie called Repo Man with Harry Dean Stanton and Emilio Estevez in it. It's also from that time. I think it's 80s. It would have had to have been. And Emilio Estevez is in this punk group that are like super punk. and then he becomes a repo man under Harry Dean Stanton, and he's teaching him the ways of being a repo man. And then
Okay, so this isn't the Butcher one where was it Jude Law starred in?
No.
This is not that film. Okay.
This is a horrible movie. We decided we were going to watch these cult favorites that are really bad movies, but people like them and get together to watch them. And so, but there's also this guy who stole some aliens from Area 51, and he has them in the trunk of his car.
What?
And so they get roped into it because there is a bulletin is put out to get this car, and so the repo guys are after it.
Yeah.
But anyone who opens the trunk gets vaporized immediately and there's this huge glowing light that comes out of it. And it's all of these weird characters that make no sense. There's all these scenes that are there for no reason, that don't drive the plot or have really nothing to do with anything, but they're just there. It's one of those movies that I'd love to know what went behind it and who was making this thing, because it's a train wreck, but in a way that you can't look away. And every time something happens, you're like, why? And what are you saying? What are you doing? What is this?
And what platforms are those on?
He grabbed it at McKay's used books. And so
Gotcha.
he just grabbed a DVD. I don't know if it's on anything or not, but if you can find a copy anywhere, it's we watched it and I was like, okay, this definitely deserves to be in that terrible cult movie up at the top, because it's so bad that it's good to watch.
Awesome.
It's good to get together with somebody and just make fun of it. So yeah, that's what I've been obsessed with lately, is just watching bad movies.
Nice.
And trippy out there movies as well.
Yeah, so Eraserhead and those. That's...
Yeah. Well, you have something that last week we did a pitch for our ideas for a reboot of Metropolis.
Yeah.
And you actually have another pitch for me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. So
this week.
Yeah. So I feel like that was a super successful segment, right? Would you agree with that?
I felt like we had a solid idea for actually making something.
Right? I think if our pitch had become a thing, like, it would have taken off. That would be great. So, I mean, I feel like we've already gotten some credibility.
There we go.
And so I think this should be something we do more often, is pitch things. So that was based on an existing property, right? This is, it's something that people know and are familiar with, but I want to pitch something original to you.
Okay.
Do you feel like, do I have enough credibility from last time's pitch?
I trust you.
You trust me? You
I
actually?
trust you.
Great.
Yeah,
okay.
You get good ideas.
Yeah. So here's my pitch.
Okay.
It's a sci-fi series, but it's also a Western.
Okay.
So you're on board with this idea?
It's kind of a weird mishmash, but okay, fine.
Okay, so the thing is, we're going to be exploring, the Western is a lot about being out on the frontier, and so we're going to be looking at these people who are rugged individualists, who are out pushing the boundaries. There'll be some maybe repressive force kind of located in the core, but these are the people who, like the cowboys, they're riding the range. They're trying to find freedom and seek their own destiny and fulfillment. I think it'll be a really interesting show to watch for that reason.
Is this like in a galaxy far, far away kind of deal? Like,
no, it'll be a post-apocalypse. So something horrible happened on Earth. And so now everybody has gone to, they're in this new system where, again, core worlds have some kind of, almost like the Empire. They've got this force that people, that are just somewhat oppressive.
Okay.
And yeah, on the Rim worlds, you've got a lot of, again, going kind of back to the Western thing, you've got a lot of like settlers and colonists and people who've tried to seek their fortunes out on the outskirts. Again, all of these people have escaped an Earth that was.
Okay. So what's the point? Like, who are we following?
Okay, yeah, I see this piece really needs to have an ensemble cast, I feel like, in order for it to work. And if you look at a lot of Westerns, they have that. You've got this group of people who are sort of a microcosm of society. So I think first off, you need your hero, right? the person that you're rooting for through the series. So
Yeah.
I'm picturing almost a John Wayne from The Searchers kind of guy, maybe even with a little flair of kind of Han Solo thrown in there. So a guy who...
So salmon shirt, blue vest.
Maybe definitely need some kind of iconic dress, but I don't know. I'm thinking maybe like a maroon with, maybe he's got like some like a coat that's really prominent, that's kind of his, like almost like a duster. Again,
Okay.
kind of juxtaposed against space.
So he's our BA action hero.
Yeah, and again, kind of in a John Wayne sense. So he's got a past. Again, in The Searchers, John Wayne was a Confederate soldier. So this guy, maybe he was actually in some kind of resistance against that core world power, and he, has now, they lost, and so he's now launched out into space, and is trying to seek his way. And so he's gathered a group of people around him. We probably need somebody who's like a lieutenant, somebody who knew him during the war as sort of a close second, his first officer.
Well,
you're in space, you're going to need a pilot, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a pilot. We'll maybe cast like a funny actor, somebody who can be a little more quippy and a little less serious. We'll have him play with toys or something. And you need an engineer. Again, you're on a spaceship, so this is your wagon train now. Instead of it being a traditional covered wagon, they're on a ship. And
I see. Okay.
yeah, and so you need your person who the crew of the ship. Now, because these people are escaping from this authoritarian control, they're probably some kind of like pseudo outlaws. So they're probably going to need like a muscle, somebody who can also be kind of morally gray character, right? Somebody who maybe isn't the smartest, but they're a physical threat.
So like a mercenary.
Yeah.
So wait, are good guys or bad guys?
So they're, again, in the classic kind of Western sense, they're anti-heroes.
So they're not the law, but they're not exactly the enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
They're outlaws.
Yeah, they're outlaws.
Okay.
So you got a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovable thieves.
Lovable thieves, absolutely.
Okay. I get the Western part.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. But why space?
Oh, well...
Why don't we just make a Western TV show?
Because the Western is dead.
Well, let's just go back in time and we can set it a show anywhere, Brett.
That's fair, but I think we could really, again, the Western a lot of times presents this kind of bleak view of the world. You've got a blank slate. So what's an even more blank slate than the Old West? Space. It's just completely wide open. And so you
Final frontier.
Yeah, you can explore themes like freedom and making your way, but then there's also the contrast. A lot of times Westerns have that contrast between, the possibilities, but there are also a lot of dangers. And so, you get sucked out into space, you're going to die.
Okay. So you're telling me that the people who are going against this big power have already lost. And so we've got a bunch of thieves together doing crimes.
Yeah.
So what's the overall narrative objective? Like, if they've already been beaten and they're just doing crimes,
that's
what's
true. You have a good point. We probably
the
would
story, the big story.
I would say we would have to probably give each of these characters maybe some kind of mysterious background. So there's something that they all don't know about each other, and we can kind of hint at that and work to build that up, and maybe even have this ragtag team of people who are seemingly like common criminals. Down the road we could work towards them working to stop the oppressiveness of that central power. So even though they lost the war, they come back to kind of be a new voice in leading the soul of the system in a new direction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, I mean, this is going to take a long time. We'll have to develop this over several seasons and really, flesh it out.
Don't get ahead of yourself here. I have to pitch this to the guys upstairs. All right. So I can probably get you a season.
Oh.
And we start there. And as far as,
But I mean, it's going to be like a traditional season, right? Like with the full,
I can give
20 to 30 episodes with
We'll probably have to go shorter as more of like a concept. This is a kind of a weird idea, so I can maybe get you 10 to 12 episodes.
But they'll all be allowed to play in order, and like the schedule is going to be secure so these can find their audience.
Let me pitch the idea, see what kind of money we get, and then you turn in what you have, and we'll look at it from there, because we'll have to make sure that this works for our audience. And so we'll determine how things get aired, but I think we're pretty good. I think we could give you a season.
Wow.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do with the ongoing possibilities of this series?
Man, just take this little box that I'm giving you and be as creative as you want with it.
Thanks, Nick.
The sky's the limit in this box.
In this box.
Yeah. Thus was how Firefly was born.
Yeah,
and
we're talking about
us.
Firefly today. So,
yes.
And Nick, you and I earlier were talking about how, in some ways, I feel like the fact that the series Firefly got canceled is kind of a magical little thing. It's this bubble of near perfection, like one season that has so much promise and potential, and it didn't run out of gas. It didn't extend itself. It's just this shiny little thing.
Shiny.
And you have a different feeling. Yeah.
I disagree with that, and a lot of avid Firefly fans would disagree as well, I'm sure, because there is so much potential and so much left on the bone. I feel that even with the wrap-up movie in Serenity, that you just feel like there's so much more to this world that I want to explore it, and I want to know what these characters have done, where they're going. And though you're right that that first season, that only season, and the movie together are just a perfect arc story. They are really good as the pieces that they are.
Yeah.
But you just want more. Like, that's how I feel, is that it's good and I enjoy it. And when I go back, I recently went back and watched the whole season. But at the end of it, when you get that final episode with the bounty hunter, and then it just ends. And even though I know Serenity is coming and I can watch that, I'm just kind of like, that's it. Like, I want more.
Yeah,
it's like, finish the season. This isn't even a season.
It isn't even. That's true. It doesn't feel like a complete season. See, I love that you can watch the show in a week.
I mean, it is nice in the binge world of the shows that do well on Netflix now are short ones, like the Maniac series that has just come on. I think it's like 8 episodes. I'm only a couple into it, and I don't know if they're even doing a second season on it. I think it is almost like a mini series in itself, that one and done. And people really respond to those. That they're like, oh, here's this nugget that I can digest really easy, and if it's a great story, and so I get that what you're saying, but as true Americans, we always want more, and that's why. Like Big Bang Theory is in its 42nd season because they just keep making those. Yeah,
well, and all those shows, even in researching for this episode, there were some people who were comparing this series, that so few shows find themselves as early as Firefly did. Like it was very clearly defined in season 1 what the show is. And somebody compared it to Mr. Robot, which I haven't had a chance to see, but that's a show that's first season was phenomenal.
Yeah, it
allegedly.
is.
And so
it is really good.
So for it to be a show like that, and then the reviewer said, and the thing with Firefly is it ended at that point where, like Mr. Robot, which has had a second season, the second season wasn't as great as the first season was. And so I love that. Of course, creator Joss Whedon has said that he's put the end on it, that nobody in his even I think his sister even responded at one point that the Whedon team, because he works with his siblings, that they're done, that they
refuse to go back to that universe.
Yeah, that what they had with the series, and that the fans should again appreciate it. Basically, that same sentiment that people should appreciate what is there. And now there have been licensed comics and some other things that you can find if you're really jonesing for something else. But
yeah, there's like a Shepherd book comic that fills in the story that you never got with him, I think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, if Nathan Fillion tomorrow's like, I'm putting the brown coat back on and we're doing another season.
Well, see, and he's another one of those people.
Lose their minds.
He's another one of those people who he's
I
never.
think you would get everybody back.
Fillion has never quite completely closed. Like, there is zero hope, but he has been resistant to the idea too.
Really?
Yeah. There have been a few statements over the last, because they've done reunion panels and things like that,
Yeah.
and a lot of times they look back really fondly and they say it was great, but I think in a lot of ways they're smart in the same way that, like, the Gilmore Girls cast came back together and did a Netflix series.
There's always the potential
Arrested Development came back
ruin
together, and
what was there.
it's just, it isn't the same. It's hard to catch lightning in a bottle, period, but to catch it twice.
Yeah, I get that.
So
It's still like that person inside though just is like, if I saw them back together, like in Clone Wash, like make a clone of Wash and bring Tudyk back as well.
No, that's funny because they could almost do like a Baby Groot thing where they have to raise Clone Wash.
Oh, there you go. Oh, before we go any further, spoilers for Firefly
and Serenity.
Serenity.
Yeah, so today just to give you a little, if you're interested in knowing about this work. So we're talking about Firefly today, which you probably saw from the bumper, and then I feel like in a lot of ways we described what the show is in our fake pitch to the studio.
Absolutely, that is that show.
That is that show. So the series ran from 2002 to 2003. It was in the midst of a really turbulent schedule. It was pitched by Joss Whedon, basically because he had had success on other series. So he was
coming off Buffy.
And so basically they were willing to greenlight anything with his name on it. And he's like, I want to do this weird thing that's a space western. And so he was at least allowed to try that. Now the studio basically killed it with scheduling. And so there actually a couple episodes did not air. Episodes aired in the wrong order. And so the studio largely was responsible for killing this show. But then
it's kind of like they were like, sure, Josh, do whatever you want. We were hoping you would come back to us with like werewolves or something.
right.
Like more of that same yummy goodness that you gave us with Buffy.
Yeah, which sounds like such a boardroom decision.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So,
we're hoping you to go more this direction, but fine, we'll give this to you.
Yeah. Now I think the show really found its success in home video release, like that it was able to get on DVDs and then even get pirated, and that helped it find its show. Most people didn't see the show when it aired.
I did not see it when it aired.
I think I have this faint memory. I don't think I saw the entire episode, but I think I saw Janetown.
Really?
On television when it aired.
See, and
I can remember, the weird thing is I remember the like song part and that there was a statue of a character and like I just have those little faint pieces, and I remembered I was like watching it in my bedroom and I was like, this show is awesome. And I tried to note what time it was on so that the next week I could try to catch it again, because that was still during those days where, and like TiVo existed, but like we didn't have it.
No.
And so it was one of those things where I'm like, oh, next week I'm going to try to catch the next episode of the show. And I can remember trying to, and it was like, where? What? And
Fox was like, you can't find it. We're going to keep shuffling.
Well, and the thing is, like, I want to say I'd missed the opening of the episode, so I didn't even know what the title of the show was. So I'm just shooting in the dark. I'm like, I want to see this kind of weird sci-fi, western-y, fun, adventure-y, almost Star Wars-y kind of thing.
Yeah. And
I can remember that one episode. Now, it may have been, I don't know if it had any like short syndication or anything.
It did on Sci-Fi.
So I may have caught it there, and that's a possibility. But I feel like I have the distinct memory of trying to come back and watch it and not being able to find it.
See, I remember knowing of it, and I think I had noticed it on Sci-Fi, but I never watched it because I was just kind of like, what is this Western doing on Sci-Fi? Like, this is weird. And so I never gave it a chance. And then when I got to college, my roommate was like, have you ever seen this show? And he's like, we have to watch it. And we watched the entire series in 2 days.
Yeah.
Because once I got a taste for it, I'm like, this is incredible. And I think we watched like a few episodes the first night and had to go to sleep. And then the next day went to classes, got food, came back to the room and spent the rest of the day and late into the night finishing it.
Yeah. That's the exact same way that I ended up seeing it. A friend of ours, I think, had it.
Yeah.
That was
my first binge watch. I just realized.
It was an early one we may have binged the first seasons of Lost before we saw Firefly, but it was right about the same time.
See, I didn't see Lost until I got married and we watched the whole thing. We binged that as well, but yeah, this was the first show that I because that was before Netflix as well. When we got into college, that was before streaming or any of that. And I never bought any series on DVD. I only caught stuff on TV. And so he had a copy of it. And of course it's so short. He's like, we can knock this out real quick. And I was like, this is incredible. I love it.
So great series. We actually want to focus our discussion today, though, on that unique blend and almost subgenre that it represents, which is the space western. So I think that's one of the things that makes this so fascinating to me. Not only has it had this sort of cult following, but that it's had a cult following as a space western. There are some works that exist in that subgenre, but not a lot. And usually, even in doing research for this, a lot of people who talked about space westerns just ended up talking about Firefly.
Yeah.
So I really want to kind of explore that. Now, in my pitch for the show, I actually covered a lot of the sort of background of what westerns are. So just for those of you who are watching and don't know what a western is, because it's not, there are a lot of people who say the western is dead now.
There's a good amount of people who just haven't watched westerns. I feel like I grew up watching a lot of them, and I think the generation before us really took them in. And so, like our fathers and parents.
Yeah, you basically had to have a dad who liked western or a grandma. If you had a dad who liked westerns or a grandma who liked John Wayne, because that's always what it was. It wasn't so much that she liked, because that was the case with my grandma. Anytime we went over to her house, it was always they were always on, but it was always John Wayne westerns because she liked John Wayne so much. Like that was
and too those are the classic movies. And as time progresses, the 80s are now classic movies, and so a lot of people focus on, like, newer generations are seeing Jaws and Star Wars and all of
those as classic
Alien
films,
those are classics, and that's very sci-fi. And now we're getting into where superhero.
Here's the thing. Superhero genre. I actually wonder if in some ways sci-fi killed the western.
It might have.
And part of, like, I even feel like Toy Story is sort of about that to some degree.
Oh, yeah.
Like Andy is super into cowboys and westerns, and
until he's not.
Until the spaceman comes along. So the history of westerns is super interesting because basically the genre.
Well, even the prospector in the second one said, as soon as the Apollos went up, we were just cast aside. And so you could probably think about the 60s and the space race as that transition.
Yeah, so the Western has a rich history, not a super long one. It's actually interesting because the time period that most Westerns are set in is about the same time period when film was first being developed. So the two genres grow up very, very much together. There are some people who look at, in the same way like sci-fi had its origins at about that same time, and there are people who look at things like Frankenstein as sort of proto sci-fi. There are also some sort of proto-Westerns, so the works of James Fenimore Cooper, or even going back to some of the settlement stories from, like, coastal, people who were, pilgrim tales of, facing off against the natives. Those types of stories, there were a lot of, like, imprisonment or capture stories that, kind of talk about this frontier that's sort of wild on the East Coast. But then the Western really becomes codified with the advent of film. They grow up together. One of the first, a lot of people actually consider it to be the first narrative feature film with editing, is a Western, The Great Train Robbery. Now, there are some people who say, well, it's actually also kind of a crime movie because there are still like it's recounting a story that would have happened just a few years before the film was made. Right. And so it's kind of like is it a Western? Is it a crime story? But anyway, so The Great Train Robbery by Edwin S. Porter is early film. Then you have sort of the rise of the B Westerns. And this is actually where I wonder if the success of Westerns actually isn't similar to the success of science fiction or of the superhero stories, because what you see is you've got a lot of B Westerns, and originally Westerns, some early Westerns were like high budget productions, but then through the silent era they gradually got like cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and so they were basically just being made for like, you know, Saturday afternoons and for kids, and
right, kind of like pulp material.
Yeah, they were super pulpy, and so what you end up seeing is that really about the time it would have taken a generation to grow up, you then get into like the 1930s, and people like John Ford and some of the other, you know, great Western directors start making Westerns that are actually a little more sophisticated and a little more aimed at an adult audience than at a child audience. And I'm like, is it that the Westerns changed, or is it just that the genre grew up with this generation of people?
Well, and that's very similar to sci-fi in the same way that it started with the pulp magazines. A lot of literature started there, and speculation and kind of like fun out there stories, and then it progressed into really phenomenal works.
Comic books, the same kind of thing. So you have, you know, even if you look back at the 60s, you know, superhero comics, while they were dealing with like some family issues and stuff, it was aimed at children. Like they were kiddie fare, and most people looked at them that way. But then as that generation grows up and you get into the 80s and the genre grows, and I actually wonder if it's because the audience is growing up with it. And so I feel like to some degree that's what happened with Westerns is there were a group of people who were kids and they were getting kiddie Westerns, and so they were falling in love with all of those trappings, and you know, they were playing cowboys and that was what they did. And so as they grew up, they still wanted that. The cool thing to me about Westerns is that it basically is an American mythic fairy land, if you will. So in the way that, you know, fairy tales in Europe are set in like romance eras, and you've got Camelot and medieval, and
yes,
we don't have castles and things like that in the United States. We have the West. And so it and really, even from its earliest days, Westerns were not depicting the real West. In fact, were
very romanticized.
Yeah, very romanticized, very mythic. So things like gunfights, like those, that's not real. And even like the guns weren't even accurate enough to have done the kinds of things that happen even in early Westerns. So it's
where you can shoot somebody's hat off of them, or a gun out of their hand. Probably can happen, but not as often. Accident. Not as often as it happens in those films.
Yeah. So you've got this genre that is allowed to kind of grow up, and what you see then as this generation that the Western was their fairy tale, you see it develop with those people. So as we then go to war, you get a lot of World War II's morality gets translated into Westerns. And so the white hats and the black hats, and you know, having this idea that, you know, oh, we're civilization and we're establishing ourselves and we're fighting against the powers that want to undermine civilization. And so you know, through the 50s and into the 60s, you have that very traditional view. Now, after that, you have generations that didn't grow up with it necessarily as kids in the same way, because again, Western grew up, so they're not making as many cheap kiddie Westerns. So the next generation is like, this is my dad's stuff, and they're a lot more skeptical of it. And they're like, I see what it is, and I understand Westerns because I've seen them. But you've got people in like the 70s who are deconstructing it, and Leone's Westerns are super dark and have a very gray morality.
Yeah, not for kids.
Yeah, not for kids. And so and at that time though, you see that science fiction is offering things to kids. And so it's kind of like, hey kids, I got some candy in my van over here. And so you know, if there had continued to be an effort to give the next generation something to find and to hold on to in Westerns, then it maybe could have had more viability. But they lost the next generation. And so Westerns, in a lot of ways, have died. Now, the interesting thing is that as sci-fi has grown, it has actually, you've got this weird mashup of the sci-fi Western. And so that's where
it kind of cannibalized some of its tropes and
Yeah.
plots and storylines because it wasn't making them anymore.
Yeah. And so, it's super fascinating. And then that, you get into the early 2000s and you have Joss Whedon creating Firefly, which is, let's take those tropes and let's add them. Now,
It's the best of both worlds.
what are what's one of your favorite tropes in Westerns?
I really like the everyman trope because a lot of times in a lot of westerns you have like the incredible lawman or the incredible outlaw, these two extremes. But I really like when a western picks up with, even if he's just, he or she or whoever is just one character within those other characters. I really like the everyman who isn't the outlaw or the lawman, who doesn't already have the weight of the world on them, but something happens in the story that propels them into that.
Who's your favorite?
So I really like, and so it thrusts them into like a conflict with a protagonist that they wouldn't normally go up against.
Yeah.
And so I think of films like 3:10 to Yuma, where you have the farmer who is just trying to pay his debts, and he's behind, and the bank sends people to burn his barn, and he's trying to get his kids to look up to him, but they kind of see him as a weak man. And then this outlaw rides into town, and he has an opportunity to escort him. That he gets captured, and then the I forget his name. The farmer has the opportunity to escort him to Yuma, has to get him on the train, the 3:10, and get him on the train to Yuma to go to Yuma prison. And so he steps up because he both needs the money for it, and he wants to show his sons that he does have courage and that he's a real man. And so he has that pressure to do that. And I love that because then it gets into his dynamic with the outlaw, and it's a great movie. I think of that. Magnificent Seven is as well, with the townspeople who their town is overrun, and they step up and find not lawmen, but they hire guys who are professionals, but they also have to step up and fight for their town. And same thing with Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. So Jimmy Stewart's character, who is
Ransom Stoddard.
Yes. So he's not a fast shooter. He's a
lawyer.
He's a lawyer, and he was
from the East.
He was a busboy at a restaurant before that. He's not your heroic figure, but I love that when he gets thrust into this situation that he can't handle because the West is so wild. And I like normal folk and how they deal with the craziness that is the West.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times Western, like the characters of Westerns are really what make the genre so interesting. And it's interesting because a lot of times they are stock characters, so they have very traditional things about them, but they also are able to serve as a surrogate for a certain swath of the audience. And so one of my favorite Western tropes is the microcosm of society that you have in Westerns. And so, a prime example of that would be Stagecoach, where on the stage to Lordsburg, you've got a lawman, you've got the kind of cowardly, driver, you've got a gambler, you've got a banker who's stealing from his bank, you've got John Wayne's character is an outlaw. And so you have the side of the law and the side against the law. You've got the hooker with a heart of gold. You've got a noble woman who would never have been with any of these people. The whiskey drummer who is surprisingly moral, and then you've got the doctor who is a drunk. And so like that, I love that in Westerns, and I think this is the cool thing, Westerns in the West as a myth forced a lot of people who ordinarily would have been in separate strata of society to all be together. And the interactions that you see with that and the ways that each strata can benefit from the others and the ways that they have conflict with each other. Westerns are great at exploring that. And actually, to me, it's one of the strengths of Firefly is that it does that. If you look at the crew of Serenity, they are just like the people who were on the stage to Lordsburg and Stagecoach. They're this hodgepodge of people with very different motives and backgrounds, and it's interesting to see the conflict, and so it becomes even a metaphor for society.
Yeah,
and I love that.
Well, even something not as small as a ship or a stagecoach, but like the Western town, is you get all of those same characters.
Yep.
Everybody who's in that stagecoach, you find that person in a one of those strip towns that's in the middle of nowhere, because on the frontier you have to stay together.
Absolutely.
Or you'll die.
Yeah.
So you have to commune with.
You have to rely on that. Yeah.
And rely on people that you may back in the East may not have had to.
Well, and even that, not only are you relying on those people, but you're actually actively working to create society, so you are working together to build a town. You're working together to build
You
homes.
end up making your own culture, your own community.
Trying to stop lawlessness. And so you've kind of, anytime you have those people coming together, you're working towards establishing something new. You're working towards the future. And so that even gives more purpose than if you just threw all those people, like you could do a story of people on an elevator and them all be from different, backgrounds or whatever, but it's different because they're just going somewhere. Whereas in the West, you all are on the same job, even if you're coming at it from very different perspectives and in different ways, unless you're working against that. And that's where you get into some interesting conflict. Yeah.
And Firefly does a great job of taking that out of the American West and putting it into this new setting.
Yeah. Now, that's one of the things that was interesting to me in rewatching it. I, first off, love that I can watch Firefly in a week. But sometimes Firefly perfectly melds those two things together, the sci-fi, space opera, and the Western. Sometimes it's just a Western, and sometimes it's just a sci-fi show. Like, what was kind of your perspective on that?
It's funny because sometimes it's a nice mixture, space Western. Sometimes it's a Western that happens to be set in space. And sometimes it's like it's a Western and there's space, like, and they're just completely separate in separate episodes. You get one or the other. And there's some plots, though, that I find that are very common Western plots that find their way into Firefly. And so I actually was looking up, I was like, what are the tropes and plots that happen a lot in Westerns? And so I looked those up, and I just grabbed a small bulleted list and thought, those are in Firefly as well. So the construction in Westerns, you got a lot of times you have the construction of the railroad or the telegraph line. That's a big, in expanding West, and you see that the same as the Alliance, who has taken control and wants to have its claws on everything, every world that has been expanded on. And they are terraforming. So that's kind of terraforming these new Earths is kind of like the railroad of we're, making a settlement here, so we have to take this world that's not acceptable and tame it. And so that's kind of what they're doing, is that's how they're building into this unknown region, protecting what's yours or protecting the family ranch. That's a big thing in Westerns, is this is mine, you can't have it, and I'll fight and kill you for it if you try to come at me.
Oh, definitely. Even, you mentioned the Magnificent Seven. Also, How the West Was Won.
Right.
That.
Somebody coming in and saying, this is my, because there can't be such law across the land when everything's so spread out. A bad guy comes in and says, this is my town, I own it, you and you're mine. And in Magnificent Seven, the town says, no, we're not, we're not going to stand for that. This is ours.
Yep.
And so same thing with Firefly of Mal, and this is my ship. Like, this is my property, and you will not take it from me.
Well, and the way he treats his crew is the same way too. Like, he is super protective of his crew.
Yeah, and he runs a tight ship. As far as and then it comes in with him protecting in Heart of Gold, that episode with the prostitute house. The reason I think he stays there is because he relates to it. He doesn't want, the Alliance took everything from him, and so he sees another group who are being attacked and wanting something taken from them, and even though I don't think they can pay. Like, there's something, he relates to that, and so he's like, no, we're going to stick here and help you fight out. I mean, that's straight up right there is Magnificent Seven.
It really is.
So the cavalry fighting off the Native Americans through science fiction, or through westerns.
Yeah, there are a lot of cavalry stories that are literally just She Wore a Yellow Ribbon is a Ford film that features a cavalry story. There is the presence of the cavalry in Stagecoach. So yeah,
and so you have there in two different ways. You find that in Firefly with whenever there's the idea that the Reavers are savages, and so anybody coming across them has to take them out immediately or run away. It's kill or be killed with them. But then you even have the Alliance, who have their boot on the throats of everybody else, and they're expanding out, and there's several episodes where they're coming into a world that has nothing, and it's their land, but they're coming in and saying, no, this is ours, we're taking it from you. And that's very much the American West as well. You've got outlaw gangs. I mean, our crew of the Firefly is an outlaw gang in themselves, and they come across several other rival gangs throughout the series. And then you have like lawmen or a bounty hunter who's tracking down his quarry. And you get that perfectly in the last episode with Jubal Early and him.
Which actually is the name of a Civil War general.
Is it really?
Yeah, so... a fun little throwback to...
Is there any character connection?
No,
there?
I think it's just
a throwback.
And the thing is, like, the West largely rises out of the Civil War. Like, you have the Civil War, and then a lot of people who are pushing West are they're people who from the ruined South are trying to escape and get to a new life.
And so you have the soldiers like Mal, who has lost as well, and so. Time to run, time to make a life somewhere else. And then you've got the sci-fi. It also has sci-fi elements that play into it. You've got a vision of the future, which is, when I first watched, I never really, I didn't really think about it so much that, this is building a world of our future. At first I was in the mindset of, this is a fun romp, and I thought of it in the same as Star Wars. It's like, this is its own story out there. But this is an actual sci-fi that is a vision of our potential future. The Earth getting used up, having to go to other worlds and terraform them in order to make them appropriate for human life. That's in many different speculative fictions. And so that's very much in sci-fi. Earth is used up, so we have to leave. Humans are melded into one culture with the Chinese and the Western society mashup. I thought that's really interesting.
It really is.
When you leave an Earth and everyone mixes together and goes to whatever place that they can find, then like cultures, there's not the boundaries, and the land that used to be, that's all gone. And so you find characters mixing and cultures, and it's so funny that how we all know Chinese, and we'll jump into it whenever,
just casually,
casually
when we need to swear.
Usually,
when we need to swear to get past the censors.
Exactly. When we get angry is when we use our Chinese.
I should have watched the show with subtitles just to see if they actually subbed it in English.
Well, see,
during
I
those segments.
tried to do that. I watched it again on, I don't know if on the DVD it'll do that, but on like Hulu right now, I was like, oh, I wonder if it'll do that. And so I tried, but there's only English subtitles. And so
so it just doesn't subtitle the
No,
the
it doesn't.
Chinese?
Yeah,
No.
I turned it on and it doesn't translate that. It's only when they're talking. So
That's
it
probably
says,
for the best.
it says speaking Chinese, like in
In parentheses,
the
yeah,
brackets.
yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's a little. I've always wondered what they're saying, and that's a little disappointing. But there's also survival above exploration in this series, and so. Yes, they're going to new worlds, but it's not like Star Trek. So its vision of the future is more Western of when we expand out, it'll be more about finding how to survive in, in places that are not hospitable, which, I mean, really, when you think of NASA and what they're doing, that is the number one priority. They are exploring, they are trying to find out, but a big focus is, can life be sustained on a different planet? Can we
search for Goldilocks planets and
right? The thought of trying to find water everywhere is the idea of that's where life can be if there is water, and so the idea of can life be there? Can we find other life? Or can we eventually get there? Which I also think is funny in this series because there are no aliens.
Yep.
Which again on first time viewing, I didn't even think about it.
Well, it's such an like an alien world that like the mishmash of cultures and everything. Like it feels like you're walking into like a Star Trek culture.
Yeah, or like a cantina in Star Wars. But even though there's not crazy aliens, it's just a mixture of peoples, and so you get that. You get that same idea, but there's not, in fact, any alien cultures, and that's very interesting. Yeah. It's a more grounded view of the future.
Yeah, I feel like if anything, the Reavers come closest to being aliens, but
they kind of get away with that being almost like their Borg or Klingon or something like that, something different in odd and other that is a protagonist, but they are. Human as well. And then of course you've got your laser guns, your ships, and your new tech that is throughout, and that's
this is definitely a work of sci-fi, like 100%.
And so even though it's not really focused on that, you still have ships in space and space battles and different things. So it's very much a sci-fi as well.
Now, as I was thinking about this, so there are a lot of episodes. Like, what would you say is the most just purely Western episode of the series?
The train job.
See, I would probably say Heart of Gold. Like, both of those, they're super Western.
Yeah.
What would you say inversely though?
It's funny because they both are like very hard Western if you remove just like a couple elements, mainly being they get on the train from a spaceship.
Yeah, and it's like a hover train.
And it's a hover train. And then
Heart of Gold, like there's a laser gun in it.
Yeah, there's the first laser gun, and he's got a speeder like Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
As well. But everybody else is on horse. It's so funny. Everyone else is on horses, but he's on this like super slow speeder.
Yep. Yeah, a horse speed speeder.
Yeah.
Yeah. You would have thought, like maybe he could have had all the horsemen leave first, and then he could be on a fast speeder that just catches up with them like right as they're about there. Like instead of. But yeah, so those two
both
episodes
of those are very
super Western.
very
What about
Western.
are there any that stand out to you as being super like sci-fi at the expense of being a Western?
That's a hard. There's a few episodes that I feel are very much not Westerns, but I wouldn't particularly say that they're straight sci-fi either. There's a couple that are almost just like heist dramas. Like when you think of Ariel and Trash.
Trash to me that would be the one that I would say is probably the most, if you're just looking at it's a sci-fi heist.
Yeah. Well, in like Ariel, they're trying to get River into the hospital and they're stealing meds from the hospital, and it even like the setup of you need to be here and this is how we're going to do it, and then it cuts to them actually doing it. That's very much like any heist movie that you'll get. And then the same thing with
Trash. You've got all those like hovering islands, and like they're all it's super sci-fi, and here we have a plan, let's execute the plan. There's some double crossing that happens.
But there's not very much Western themes pushed
Except
into
that
those.
I guess Malcolm ends up naked in the desert in that one. That's about as close as you come.
Yeah.
So, but that kind of idea, and we initially were talking about just like exploring like what is the most of those. But I feel like the thing to me that was interesting about this series is where those two things work really, really well together. And so I was wondering, what do you think is the best melding of sci-fi and Western that we see in Firefly?
Well, see, my mind immediately went to the ones that were very Western, like the Train Job, because I was like, oh, what's the best mixture? And I was like, oh, Train Job, because it's,
it's a Western.
Heisting a train is very Western, and there's a spaceship hovering above it. So my mind went there, but then I was like, it's very much, almost a straight Western, just with a couple fantastical new tech angles to it. But the more I watched through and was thinking about it, Our Mrs. Reynolds, that episode, I feel is a very good blend of both the West and sci-fi. And I wasn't expecting that one either, because that's not the one that comes to mind when I think of Western. But I think it takes from both genres and molds them together to make something that could only be this. And the reason why is I feel like it used the space frontier as the New West in one of the best ways that the series ever has. And so because you start with it uses the openness of space and the distance of the planets and this new world building to its advantage, because it starts off with them doing a job. It opens with Jane and him on the boat where he's dressed up like a woman in his pretty little bonnet, his floral bonnet. There's so much great comedy in this particular in this particular episode. It has some of the best comedy in the series, which I love. And so it opens with them doing a job. They go into town, and the local can't really pay them for the job, and so they are exchanging goods and stuff. And so you see them bringing in like feed and alcohol and different things into the ship, and that's very much the West as well. Like, I need you to do this job, but I can't pay you. I don't have any gold. I don't have any money. I could give you this. And so bartering and trading is very much a part of the West. And the reason it works is because of the world building that they've set up here, that these outlying planets don't have those kind of resources anymore. And this being in the future, that just wouldn't work on Earth. Everything is connected these days on Earth. You can get, and everything is based on money here in modern times. And so a way to bring that back to the Western trading is, well, we go out into space, and all these places don't have, like, there's this standard currency is hard to come by, and so they go off of trading, which is how Mal gets a wife. And that's how, because of that existing, that's Saffron's easy way of getting onto the ship. She uses that system to her advantage. And so because that's there, and also like everything here on Earth, as far as like cultures and customs and what's legal in like say the U.S. is known. Like we have strict laws, and even in different countries you can know like what you can and can't do. But here is the New West, and so things like, oh, you got married and you didn't realize it. Like that's taking that.
Oh goodness, and that. Oh, what was it that the Searchers? The Searchers has that where Jeffrey, oh God, goodness, what's the actor's name? I'm totally forgetting it. Anyway, but where Christopher Pike, the original Captain Pike.
Yes.
Accidentally gets married.
Yeah.
And she follows along with, yeah.
And it's because all of these people have gone to their own worlds and they've developed their own cultures and customs to where things are now unknown again. You can go to a world, and Wash was like, I was once on this world where they were juggling geese, like goslings. And that's just what they did for fun.
Yeah.
And
in the West, like that was great too, because you had the indigenous people that you interacted with. You had Mexico is always treated as like its own thing. That's just totally The rules are completely different there than they are in the American West, and yeah.
And so, there's all this unknown stuff. And so that's how she's even able to get onto the ship in the first place and enact her plan is basing off of, because they're already on their back foot with, I'm married. And so she's using the confusion and the funniness of the situation in order to get what she wants out of the ship. And so, and then there's also the idea of survival out here in the void and on these planets is cutthroat and brutal, and so people will do what they have to do. And so you have Saffron, who's willing to kill all of these strangers and get the money off this ship because she's just trying to make her way. And then you have the two guys who are on that net space station that's getting ready to catch them. And that's very much like a Western, people lying in wait on the trail, with an inside person who has pushed the wagon, or, the train is heading to this spot and that's where we're going to ambush them. That's very much a Western. People lying in wait, ready to take from people who are unassuming and unexpecting. They don't know that's going to be happening. And so that's very much Western. But I also like where it melds into sci-fi really well is that because they're in space, they're stuck on the ship. And so when Saffron hijacks it and starts knocking people out and locking them in their quarters and then rerouting the ship, in a Western, if people, started realizing what was up, they could easily just like jump ship, off of a train, off of a wagon, and there's all kinds of times in Westerns where somebody realizes what's going down and they just take off into the distance. They don't even know where they're going or if they'll survive.
Oh yeah,
but totally. They're just like, just running out into the desert because I know it's better than right here. But here there is no place to run. You're in space. You leaving is death immediately in the void. And so it plays on that really well of your survival has to be on the ship. And so you're stuck. So you have to figure out the problem and you have to regain control. And so the trapped in space and they can't run to survive, it takes the void of space and the scariness of it, and mixes it very well with those Western tropes.
Yeah, for me, man, you made a really strong case. I actually, whenever you initially, because we talked about the episode a little bit beforehand, and whenever you originally pitched that as your episode, I was like, I wonder how he's going to do that. And now I'm like, oh, that is super great blending of the two.
Well, it's easy to forget when you have somebody like, I forget the actress who plays Saffron, like her performance in there is just like super engaging, to say the least. And the story is great because she does such the doughy-eyed, simpleton so well, and then there's that awesome twist where she's like, no, I'm bad and I'm taking over the ship. It's done so well, and so those elements that are in place, you don't think of them as much. For me, the episode that actually stood out to me, and I considered several episodes, because there are a handful of episodes that do a really good job of benefiting from both, I feel like. But for me, it was Out of Gas.
The episode
which I have to say,
flashbacks and flash forwards.
When you told me that before we jumped on here, I was like, I think of that as a very strict space one, because I couldn't think of anything particularly Western about it.
Yeah.
So I'm interested.
Yeah, and it is almost exclusively set in space. So
Right,
it is definitely easy. For me, a lot of it comes down thematically. So the setting is super sci-fi, and some of the things that are happening could only happen in science fiction. However, to me, thematically is super Western and really benefits. It actually, the sci-fi-ness of it enhances the Westernness of it, which to me is really, really cool. So one of the big things that you see in Westerns, and I mentioned this earlier, is there's a constant contrast between the hope that the West offers and the opportunity that the West offers and the potential danger that the West offers. And you even mentioned this a little bit with the idea that if you step out of the ship in space, you die, right? Well, Westerns, a lot of times there is that fear. And sometimes it's the fear that there are, natives who are going to kill you. Like, come burn your house down, kidnap your daughters, whatever. Like that is a theme that's developed a lot. Or just the idea, even, sometimes you see people who are on their own. And if you're by yourself in the West, it's deadly. And so for me, space is so much better at that even than the old West was. Because, a lot of those Westerns are set in like Monument Valley. And that really is actually not a place that offers very much hope. So you look out, it's super bleak, and you're like, how are these people farming here? How
are you getting anything out of the ground?
Yeah, and so, but the cold vacuum of space, and the episode actually opens on a shot of Serenity just dead in the water in just open black space. And to me, that's almost like I could see if John Ford had made a sci-fi movie, like that kind of shot would be there, because in his Westerns, a lot of times you have big, open, huge, bleak desert. And this one lone figure standing against the hazards and really holding out hope. And with that, in this episode, there are several references to the idea of freedom. So you've got the danger of space, you've got the danger of the cold, you've got the danger of the limitations that a human has, even the danger of like, who can you trust? You contrast that with the opportunity that space gives you of freedom. And so there's the idea that from the very first flashback, whenever they walk on the ship, see the ship for what it can be, freedom.
But it's also your trap.
Yeah. Wash, at one point, early in the episode, whenever he comes and joins the party, he just makes a casual reference to the fact that he had plotted a course to avoid the Alliance, and how, so the whole reason they are where they are is to maintain that freedom, and there's this opportunity that they have because they're able to get out into the black. And I even feel like some of the interactions that Mal has with the crew as they sign on, those like Anara, it's clear that Anara is looking for something, and Mal thinks like, oh, are you trying to run away from something, which is true of Simon and River. But for her, it's actually she's looking towards something, like she is wanting something, and so she's reaching out. So there's that opportunity that it's offering, and so just it's such an interesting balance between those two, which is super, super Western. So you've got the dangers, but you have the opportunities, and how are our characters going to survive the dangers to reap the opportunity. I feel like it also, and I mentioned one of my favorite things in Westerns is that it becomes a microcosm of society. And this episode is just ripe with that. So the episode was actually sort of designed to be our second introduction, because the way the network fouled everything up, they didn't play the pilot first. So you don't necessarily get introductions to all the characters. So this one, and in watching even the commentary track on this, they're saying that the opening scene of the Simon's birthday, whenever everybody's talking to everybody, they'll use words like preacher, engineer, the pilot,
Doctor.
Doctor, wife, so that you're kind of establishing who all these people are.
That's funny. I didn't notice that in watching it.
Oh, and it seems supernatural, which Whedon's, writing and his team's writing is always supernatural, and you don't catch those things. But yeah, it's intentionally doing that. And so you see all of these people who have come together from super disparate backgrounds. They're making jokes about their lives and things, but they've all come together, and now they're basically a family. And that's the West. You have these people who don't have a choice who they're with. They're stuck with the people that they're with.
That is a great scene of seeing them all together and it actually working, because a lot of times they're at odds.
Oh, yeah, totally. Well, and even, I love when Zoe initially meets Wash in the flashback.
Yeah.
And she hates him. There's some of those kinds of things where it's super...
that ridiculous mustache.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't like him.
Yeah, when Jane is holding up Malcolm and Zoe, there are all of these great interactions where these are people who have been forced together, but now they're a family. Now they're building their own little pocket of civilization together, and I think that's great. The interactions then that they have, you see those points where they don't necessarily see eye to eye. So you have a short interaction between Book and River. And, Shepherd Book is reading the Bible, but he's still very afraid because he realizes the danger that they're in. And River walks in and is like the book says not to be afraid, but you're afraid. And she, even in other episodes, more so is sort of this question on, traditions, and she cuts up his Bible
and
later.
Critical of it, yeah.
Yeah. And so you've got those people and their interactions and their conflicts. And so for me, it's a great episode that encapsulates the way the whole series creates this microcosm of society on this little ship called Serenity. So, and that it's kind of a bottle episode. You're stuck with those people. And so in the same way, Stagecoach, again, is a great example of this. Stagecoach is built entirely on that. You spend almost the entire movie with just the characters that are on the stage. This episode, you're stuck with basically just your characters. You've got, what amounts to a cameo of the crew that come onto the ship later in the episode. But that's a thing. Everyone has a role to play too. So we were talking about, not just in that microcosm is everybody forced together, but they're actually working towards something together. And so in this one, I love the scene where Jane walks up and, what do you two think you're doing fighting at a time like this? You're using up air. That is such a great, but everybody is contributing, and so you've got
which
those,
isn't always true of every episode. Some some characters are just missing, or they're off doing their own thing. Yeah, and
they do to some degree. They sideline Zoe a little bit. She was actually getting married to Lawrence Fishburne at the time, which I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah,
they had been a couple.
Yeah, they recently called it quits.
Probably for me, though, the biggest reason that this is the perfect blending of Western and sci-fi is that this, to me, is an episode that perfectly shows how Malcolm is the picture of a Western hero, but set in this sci-fi future, right? And so it almost, first off, the conflicts that he's facing, he faces literally every type of, there's man versus man. He's fighting against, there are the people who try to take his ship. There's even some conflict with the other crew members. There's the battle against the elements that he has to fight. There's the battle against even himself, where he's trying to force himself and push himself to be able to repair the ship. You also see one of the great things about Western heroes is they always have their code. And this episode, it's not as prominent as it is in some of the other episodes, but this episode, you see that Malcolm is a man who has a code. And so the way that he even stays behind with the ship is sort of that. Now that it feels a little nautical maybe, which in sci-fi you're on a ship now. But the idea that to me it even feels like the Alamo, where you stay and fight to the last man. And that's what Malcolm is doing. And also the way that he doesn't shoot the captain of the other ship, even though he can. And he points that out. His code drives what he does and who he is. And then, to me, the coolest thing is the way that that Malcolm basically becomes in this episode Gary Cooper from High Noon. So in High Noon, Gary Cooper is the lawman, but he is in this town that so there's an outlaw coming who had been imprisoned by him, and he's wanting revenge. And Gary Cooper, it's like his last day on the job. He really could just leave. He's recently married. It was time to take off, but this outlaw's coming, and he realizes, like, if I like leave, then the outlaw's going to come back in and do the same kind of stuff that he did before and take back over this town and the work that I've done to establish civilization. And none of the people here are seeing it. Like, they're all fighting against me. They're like, you know what? Maybe, Sheriff, you should just take off. I'm not going to be one of your deputies. And so he ends up having to face off against this guy and his gang by himself. So Malcolm has to be he's the needed, but he's the unwanted leader. And he's a solitary person. He's by himself, and you see that a lot where there is that isolated person. Gary Cooper is that in High Noon. And to me, as we follow that, we watch the explosion happens, and he has to make all of the hard decisions by himself. Kaylee is frozen. Like, she doesn't know what to do, and she's overwhelmed, and he has to tell her, pick yourself up, go down to the engine room, get this thing working. He goes into the infirmary where Zoe is injured, and Wash is just torn up, and that is the only thing he wants to do. And Malcolm has to confront Wash.
He has
and
to throw him out the room, yeah.
And that's super. And he's making an incredibly hard decision that is the right decision, and he has to make that for the crew because otherwise they're going to die. In fact, it's what Wash ends up going to do that leads to their salvation. So Malcolm is making the right decision for the crew, but it is not the decision that the crew wants him to make. So he is the man on his own. The book even disagrees with him about what he says to Wash, and is like, shouldn't her husband be down here? And Malcolm says no, and he steps up and has to do those things. And then the fact that he sends his crew out and stays on the ship by himself. And so by the end, he literally, again, Gary Cooper, he is standing by himself to face off with these guys who come on and try to take his ship. And that to me is interesting because in another one of the contrasts that you see in the West is the idea that force can be an incredibly dangerous thing. And so those guys come on and they shoot Mal, and force can be a very bad thing and a very dangerous thing. But then also, the only way he's able to drive them off is by picking up a gun himself and running them off. And so you've got that. But to me, Malcolm Reynolds is the Western hero. He is, in fact, besides being a little jokier than John Wayne is, which there's some John Wayne Westerns where he'll laugh or carry on or do things that are, he'll pull pranks on people. But a lot of time, basically, Malcolm is a John Wayne character. Like, I could see if Firefly had been made in the 1950s, John Wayne would have been Malcolm Reynolds. And so for me, that's why this is the perfect melding, because space takes all of those trappings of the Western and jacks it up to 11. So it takes it, space is more dangerous than the West was. The way that he is solitary is more solitary and more important than even it is in the West. Because in some ways, you do feel like in High Noon that, Gary Cooper could just leave and the next marshal will come through and take care of things. And so you almost question, like, Gary Cooper, you're really making the right decision here. But here, every decision Malcolm makes, he has to make. Well,
it's funny you mentioned that because how the episode ends is so great, because there's a few times in the episode where you hear the audio of him being sold the
salesman,
ship. Of this will be a great, ship for you. She'll run forever. You'll love it. And then at the end, you realize that the salesman is talking about a different ship. And he turns and sees the Firefly and smiles. And it's like, this is the life that he chose. And so in the same way with Gary Cooper he could leave, and maybe he should leave, but this is what he chose for his life. He was going to be a lawman and protect his town until the very last day. And so the same way with Mal, he chose this ship that is killing him, losing oxygen, dead in the water. This is what he chose. And so even though it's very nautical of going down with your ship, it's also very Western of this is the life I chose. I'm sticking to it to the end. I'm not going to turn tail and run.
Even
here
the
at
idea
the
that
end.
the land that I'm on right now is I'm defending this land. Like this is
Yes. I'm going to be here until my end because this is who I am, and I've connected it to this place.
Yeah. So this has been fun to talk about. Now, one of the things, like a lot of times whenever we discuss Firefly, we speculate about what would have happened. And in some ways, Serenity, I think, answers that. But since we're talking about the Western theme and how it connects to the show and how the show utilizes both tropes of the Western and sci-fi tropes and sci-fi elements to kind of make a best of both of those worlds situation, what do you think the show could have done in future seasons with combining those two things? Like, what if the show had kept going, what would have been the most Western and sci-fi thing that the show would have done?
There was a the show is obviously building up the tension between Mal and Jane as the captain and hero who has a code, and the mercenary who he's hired that doesn't have much morality or code at all, but also wants to be in charge. And so their tension and back and forth is great of how they play off each other. And you see Jane's growth through the series in like Janestown, where you see him contemplating why someone would die for him when he wouldn't die for anyone, or doesn't even want to share his loot with anyone. He's very much for himself. And so you do see his character grow, but even till the end and even into Serenity, they're still button heads. And I was reading some trivia where Baldwin was talking about how I forget his first name, character for Jane, last name is Baldwin.
No, Adam Baldwin, the actor?
Adam Baldwin. He was talking about how there were some ideas later down the road where Jane would even get his own ship and be a captain, and then they would go head to head. That it was going to be Mal versus Jane captaining his own crew, or at least having a ship of some kind.
That would have been really interesting.
Yeah, right? And I was like, oh man, that would have been great. And so I wonder if they would have taken the, man in the two men in the street, facing down gunfight, but with ships.
Well, the thing is, they also could have done an OK Corral sort of scenario where you've got two rival gangs that are fighting over, so My Darling Clementine, or gunfight at the OK Corral, where
and what if some other people on the ship actually went with Jane and broke up the crew, and so you have rival gangs or something like that. And most likely with the show there would be some sort of reconciliation, I would think, but maybe not. You never know. And so that they were obviously heading to something, to a breaking point of some kind, either them Jane breaking down and submitting, or their relationship falling apart and breaking the two apart, and then making them either rivals or enemies. And so that would have been cool to see.
I would have loved to see, and Serenity actually ended up addressing this in a very different way, but I would have loved to see the Reavers become the interaction with the indigenous people of this show. So Westerns, there are lots and lots of Westerns that explore the interaction between the settlers and the Native Americans, and some of those are super, super racist. So I think the thing that would have been cool is a lot of those films were made in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Western largely is dying in the 60s, and so it's a very 1950s perspective of things. And with the early 2000s and with Whedon at the helm, I think he would have really gotten an interesting picture of how indigenous peoples exist, and that it could have been nuanced and different than they're just evil, which is a lot of times what you see in they're evil savages in older Westerns. The natives are a threat, and that's all they are.
Right.
And what we've seen so far, in the one season that we have of Firefly, the Reavers are just savage monsters. Yeah. And so I think it could have been really interesting to explore that more. And if they had been their own culture or society or something. And again, Serenity does its own thing with that. And in some ways, Serenity actually does, I think, create a situation that could have given you some sympathy, at least, for the Reavers. It doesn't necessarily humanize them. And I think that would have been the interesting thing to see is the exploration of the humanity that potentially exists there. And again, Malcolm Reynolds as the type of John Wayne, I feel like he could have been, you could almost, again, see the Searchers, where he has a certain attitude and a certain perspective on what the savages are. And, maybe even if a member of his crew is taken by them and he has the same attitude that John Wayne has whenever, like, we find my niece, we're going to have to kill her because she's gone native, basically. And you could have done something very interesting where, they find Kaylee, who has been taken by the Reavers, and he has to make that decision. Do you end that person, or is there still humanity there? And so some things like that I think could have been really interesting with the Reavers, and especially a great way to marry sci-fi. And you could still have had some of those elements that were present in Serenity that they're experimented on. They've been created by the Alliance.
Well, and other sci-fi has done similar things as well. Like Star Trek, where the Klingons were just the protagonist force, and they were very brutal and at first. But then, as Star Trek different series and movies go, you start seeing more into their culture and their politics, and they're not all just bad enemy people. There's other things and more nuance going on within their world that plays into the universe conflict that they're in with the Federation.
Yeah. Well, and even especially since it's a world without aliens, because that's the thing in sci-fi, aliens naturally become your indigenous people. I mean, that's why James Cameron used them as stand-in for Native Americans
with
Avatar.
Yeah.
And so this being a universe without aliens, this other group becomes the native, and how do you interact with that? So that would have been really interesting to me. Fortunately, we got a sequel. I actually really like Serenity. I think it's a great send-off.
I just watched it because I watched the series a few weeks back and went through it, and then just this week I finished up with watching Serenity. And I had done a rewatch of Firefly a while back, but didn't watch Serenity. So it had been a very long time since that one, and I was like, man, this is a tight, fun, and suspenseful action film. I really like it, and I love Chiwetel Ejiofor as the assassin. Oh man, he's so great. He's kind of like, where Jubal Early was like the psychotic out there bounty hunter.
Yeah, see that was actually the thing for me that kept
assassin.
me from being able to enjoy Jubal Early, is that he was almost too crazy to be like taken seriously.
Oh, see, I like when he swings. When at first you're like, oh, he's just a bounty hunter bad guy, and then there's that interaction with Kaylee where he just asks her the question of, have you ever been raped before? And then all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, this guy
I mean, at that point he's working. Once he interacts with Simon, and from that point on, like, he doesn't work. See, I like
he does get outwitted by Summer or not Summer.
That's her real name.
That's her real name, River.
Yeah. Well, and part of it, even like, he becomes that. Sometimes Joss Whedon tries to make people seem like really learned and gives them kind of this like bookishness that in that character it didn't totally make sense, that he was so philosophical while simultaneously being
unhinged.
Unhinged.
Yeah.
And so, like, I like the consistency.
But see, I see that as almost like a Hannibal Lecter, where he's sophisticated but he's also a monster. And so I kind of like that part.
Yeah, but his monstrosity is in line with that, though. Like, that would be my thing, is that,
I guess.
Whereas Jubal Early felt a little uneven. Whereas,
and then at the end, he's just floating through space. He's like, well,
Yep.
Here I am. That's kind of a silly.
Yeah.
But the assassin
in Serenity
is
the consistency of what makes him scary, but also like the motivations behind that character. Are great. So now to me, it doesn't feel like a Western really at all. I mean, there are a couple nods to the fact that that's still present.
Yeah.
Initially they're doing a bank job, but to me, it's super
sci-fi action.
Yeah.
It's much more focused on that side of it. But yeah, we should do a deeper dive into Serenity.
We'll definitely look at Serenity at some point.
Another episode. Any other things you just want to gush on Firefly before we go?
Oh, good. Because it's such a great show. Like that's the thing. Again, it is this bubble of near perfection that is a magical thing. And so I love every time I've rewatched it, I love it as much as I did the time before. It's
one of those when you do a rewatch of it, on this last time I was like, will it still appeal to me like it did years ago when I watched it? And as soon as the jokes start coming in and the humor and the banter between the characters, I'm like, yeah, I'm back in. I love this.
I think the characters, the ensemble cast is really great. And the thing that I found,
they just work.
Every time I watch the show, I have a new episode that stands out to me. So like an episode that maybe I dismissed before, I will like more now. And, maybe the episode that was my favorite last time, I'm like, yeah, it's still good. But so I find it interesting that the way that it evolves or adapts to where I am in life at various points that I've watched it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And I love the humor. Goodness, I love the humor. Yeah. I love, because I was rewatching Our Mrs. Reynolds, and the comedy in that episode is, I think, the best out of the whole series. Like, you have Book saying, he's like, if you take advantage of that girl,
special hell,
you're going to the special hell reserved for child molesters and people who talk at the theater.
Yes.
And then Jane, with when we're first introduced to Vera,
tries to trade Vera. Oh, that's such a great scene, because initially you're like,
great.
Is Jane gonna murder?
Yes, it
Mal?
plays.
And then
it plays on their
This is my
conflict.
very best gun.
He's like, 6 men came to kill me once. The best of them carried this. It's like, it is my very favorite gun.
So
yeah, he's like, she's got a name, Jane. He's like, so does this. Call her Vera. It's played so well, and yeah.
So what are we looking at next week?
Next week,
or 2 weeks from now, because we're a bi-weekly show.
That's true.
Have to
you
remind
keep forgetting that.
Hey, you do too. I am positive at some point you said last week in this episode.
In the next episode, we're gonna do a shift, and we had this. There's good comedy in Firefly, and we're gonna go a little bit funner with a family flick, I would say.
Family sci-fi movie.
Family sci-fi with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. This is a favorite from our childhood.
Oh, absolutely. This probably I'm sure there was a point in my childhood where this was probably my favorite movie.
See, there's movies that just stand the test of time, like Cinderella, that generation after generation of kids see that movie and like that movie. I wonder how Honey, I Shrunk the Kids has with this younger generation, if they connect to this movie at all, because it's beloved by pretty much everyone our age who grew up with it. But I wonder if it has lasted into other kids' childhoods.
Well, it may have fallen because a lot of Disney's live action films, they don't do as well. They don't last as well. Yeah, but they've got great ones out there. So yeah, we're going to be tackling this sci-fi with shrinking humans and the fun that they have next time on the Dead Padawan Society. Well, as always, thank you for joining us on the Dead Padawan Society. We appreciate your support and feedback. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you completely disagree with us and you think the most sci-fi episode or the most Western episode of Firefly is Shindig, then leave a comment, and you can do that on Facebook, or
you can be wrong. On that's fine.
Yeah, you're welcome to
your opinion. You can have it, but you're wrong.
Also, feel free to shoot us an email at Dead Padawans Society. Please make sure you include the second S, or you're not going to get us. You're going to get somebody else. I think they're a fan fiction community for Star Wars.
Do they have? Well, it's a small fanfic, page, but I don't think they have an email. So Dead Padawan Society, 2 S's, @gmail.com.
And so we would love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Live long and prosper.
And may the Force be with you.